They said I always made trouble, but this time they made peace far too easy by leaving me out entirely. It was a crisp autumn morning in Denver, the kind where the air smelled faintly of rain and roasted coffee from the shop across the street. I'd just poured myself a cup, the steam curling upward like a slow exhale when my phone buzzed. I almost didn't check it. I'd been avoiding notifications lately, but the name caught my eye. Marcy, an old church friend I hadn't spoken to in years. Her message was short, cheerful, almost cruel in its innocence. "Your sister looks stunning in her wedding gown." My hand froze midair. What wedding gown? I clicked the link attached to her text, and the screen filled with light. My breath caught. There she was, Clara Blake Foster, smiling beneath a canopy of golden string lights at a vineyard in Napa Valley. A lace dress hugged her frame, her blonde hair pinned perfectly in a loose bun. Around her stood my parents, Margaret and Thomas Blake, raising champagne glasses, grinning like they were starring in some glossy magazine ad for the perfect American family. I wasn't there. No text, no call, no invitation. Just a picture-perfect family without the inconvenient daughter. The mug slipped from my fingers and shattered on the tile. Hot coffee splattered my bare feet, but I barely felt it. My pulse roared in my ears. "They didn't forget me," I whispered. "They just decided life was easier without me." The apartment was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. I picked up the pieces of the mug, one shard at a time, setting them gently in the trash like a ritual. Then I walked to my desk by the window, opened my laptop, and typed Blake Foster Wedding Napa Valley into the search bar. The internet delivered what it always does: confirmation of what hurts most. There were dozens of photos. Clara laughing with friends, my mother adjusting her veil, my father giving a toast. Even distant cousins I hadn't seen since childhood were there holding flutes of champagne. Everyone looked radiant, timeless, whole. Except me. I zoomed in on one photo, my mother's hand on Clara's shoulder, the diamond bracelet I'd helped my father pick out gleaming in the sunlight. That bracelet was supposed to be my college graduation gift. They'd forgotten to give it to me back then, too. I closed the browser and stared at the wall. For a moment, I tried to convince myself this was an honest mistake. Maybe they thought I was too busy. Maybe the invitation got lost. But my gut knew better. In my family, absence was never an accident. I reached for my phone, opened the family group chat, the Blakes. The last message was from 3 months ago, Mom sharing a link to Clara's bridal shower registry. I hadn't replied. No one had followed up. That was how we operated now, silence padded with politeness, affection wrapped in avoidance. I scrolled through old messages, watching years of strained civility play out on the screen. Birthday emojis, instead of calls, half-hearted hope you're well texts that said nothing. It was astonishing how a family could vanish in plain sight. Rain began to fall outside, soft against the windows. I muted the jazz music playing from my speaker. The cheerful melody suddenly felt offensive. My reflection hovered faintly on the darkened laptop screen. I didn't look angry, just hollow. I turned toward the old cedar cabinet beside my desk. On top sat the family photo taken when I was 16, the Blakes in matching white shirts posing on the front porch of our old house in Connecticut. My mother's hand rested gently on Clara's back. Mine hung awkwardly by my side. I picked up the frame and set it face down. Something in me shifted, then, not rage, not grief. Just a cold, clean quiet. I remembered the email login my father had once given me when I was helping him book flights for a business trip. The account was still saved on the family iPad I kept for streaming movies. I powered it on, waited for the home screen to appear, and opened his inbox. There it was. Subject: Alaska Airlines. Flight confirmation date 2 weeks ago. Passengers: Thomas Blake, Margaret Blake. Route: Denver to San Francisco. 2 round-trip tickets. Purchased without a word. I sat back slowly, my hands trembling just enough to make the glass of water on the table ripple. It wasn't just that they'd gone without me, it was that they'd made plans to. Thought it through. Decided. They'd erased me long before the photos went online. The phone rang. I stared at the screen, Mom. For a moment I thought of ignoring it. But my thumb moved on its own, pressing accept. "Hannah," she said briskly. Her voice, crisp, distracted the background noise of laughter and clinking glasses faint behind her. "Can this wait? We're in the middle of something. It's Clara's wedding today, isn't it?" My voice came out, steady. Too steady. There was silence just long enough for me to hear the echo of music in the distance. Then she sighed. "You always make things bigger than they are. We didn't want any tension on your sister's special day. You understand that, don't you?" "You didn't want tension," I said quietly. "So you remove the person who might cause it." Her tone sharpened. "Please don't start this now. Start what I asked, my throat burning. Feeling something, Hannah, you've been distant for years. We didn't think you'd even want to come." I laughed, short and bitter. "You didn't even give me the chance to prove you wrong." "Don't be dramatic," she said, but I could hear the impatience cracking her composure. "I'm not being dramatic," I whispered. "I'm being honest." And then I ended the call. The click was soft, final. I set the phone beside the broken mug's remnants and unfastened the silver bracelet I always wore, Mom's graduation gift to me, the one she'd once said symbolized our bond. I laid it on the counter beside the phone, its reflection catching the gray light. Outside, the rain deepened a steady rhythm against the glass. Planes flew low through the clouds, their engines faint thunder in the distance. Somewhere up there, my parents were clinking glasses, maybe congratulating themselves for keeping peace by cutting me out. I sat on the floor and drew my knees to my chest, not crying, not raging, just breathing. For once there was no noise, no arguing, no desperate scramble to make myself heard. Only silence. And in that silence, something inside me clicked into place. I didn't want their version of family anymore. The kind built on image manipulation and unspoken debts. I wanted air. I wanted peace. I rose, crossed the room, and stepped onto the balcony. The city below shimmered beneath the drizzle, car lights streaking through the fog like veins of gold. The wind was cold against my face, but it felt clean. "They wanted peace," I murmured, voice barely audible over the rain. "I'll give it to them." A plane ascended through the clouds, disappearing into the gray sky. "If they wanted a world without me," I said softly, "then they can have it." The rain fell harder, tapping like applause on the railing. I stood there until my coffee went cold again, until the city lights blurred into watercolor, until I could no longer tell where the hurt ended and the relief began. Somewhere deep inside, I felt the first small pulse of something I hadn't known in years, freedom maybe, or revenge. But it wasn't the loud kind. It was silent, quiet as breathing. And that's how it began the day my family flew to my sister's wedding, and I started erasing myself from their lives. The smell of lemon polish always reminds me of Sunday mornings, the days when I learned to be invisible. It was the scent of my mother's control, sharp and clean, covering every surface of our New Haven house until nothing felt real. Even now, years later in my Denver apartment, I can close my eyes and smell it. The gleaming floors, the air tight with silence, the faint echo of Clara's laughter from down the hall. I used to believe if I breathed quietly enough, I could belong in that silence too. I was 10 the first time I noticed how my family's love had rules. It was a Saturday, the day of Clara's big dance competition. I had just finished an art project for family night. A poster covered in paint cutouts and a crooked heart with all our names inside. I ran downstairs, clutching it with pride, just as my mother was calling out for Dad to start the car. Clara, 10 months older, was already dressed in her sequined costume, golden hair curled perfectly. She looked like sunlight in motion. "Mom, look," I said, holding up the poster. "I made us." "A next time, sweetheart," she interrupted, not even glancing my way. She was busy checking Clara's makeup bag, counting hairpins, adjusting straps. "You know how important this day is. We don't want to be late." "I can come too," I offered, hopeful. Her voice softened just enough to sting. "Not today, honey. You understand, don't you? Understanding. That word became the currency of my childhood. I understood why they left me home, why Clara's ribbons hung on the wall and mine stayed in a drawer, why my questions always seemed like interruptions. Understanding was what made me good, polite, tolerable. When they left, the house went quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I taped my poster to the living room wall anyway. The paint dripped slightly, leaving red streaks like bleeding hearts. Later that night when they came home, I overheard my father say, "She did wonderfully." Judges loved her confidence. My mother's voice glowing with pride just like her mother. No one mentioned the poster. A week later at dinner, Dad looked at Clara and said, "We should frame your medal. That's something to remember." Then he turned to me, smiling kindly but without focus. "You should talk more, Hannah. People don't know what you're thinking when you're so quiet." I wanted to say that I was thinking plenty, that I was thinking how it felt to live in a house where sound belonged to someone else. But I just nodded and stared at my plate. The first time I disappeared completely was on my 13th birthday. Mom had promised a small family dinner. She even baked a cake, lemon frosting, my favorite. But halfway through the afternoon, the phone rang. Clara had won some school award, and suddenly there was a banquet they couldn't miss. Mom's voice breathless with excitement. "We'll only be gone an hour or two, sweetheart. Don't start without us." The door shut. The car engine faded down the street. The cake sat on the table, candles unlit. I waited until the frosting started to melt under the kitchen light, then lit the candles myself. Just to see them glow. I blew them out without making a wish. The next day, when Mom saw the cake, she frowned at the wax puddles. "You should have waited," she said, like patience could have made them remember. That was the day I learned you don't have to shout to disappear. You just have to stay quiet long enough. The only person who noticed was Grandma Eleanor. She lived 3 towns over in a little yellow house that smelled like soap and lavender. She was my mother's mother, but the two couldn't have been more different. Grandma had paint under her nails, wild curls that refused to stay pinned, and eyes that saw right through excuses. She'd hand me sketch pads every time I visited. "You don't have to be like anyone else to be loved," she'd tell me, pressing a pencil into my hand. "Draw what they refuse to see." I did. I filled pages with color faces that smiled, houses that felt warm, worlds where I belonged. Grandma said my drawings spoke louder than words ever could. She said quiet wasn't weakness, it was focus. She also used to say, "Your mother's afraid of mess. She thinks control will keep her safe." I didn't understand it then. I just knew that when I was with Grandma, my silence didn't feel like punishment. But when I was 17, Grandma died. The funeral was all white lilies and polite tears. My mother organized every detail: music, flowers, guest, seating with precision that looked like devotion. I didn't see her cry. She only paused once when someone said Eleanor had such a soft heart. Later that night, while guests murmured in the next room, I found a quiet corner and sketched Grandma's portrait from memory. Her kind eyes, the tiny wrinkles near her mouth, the warmth that had always made space for me. My mother walked in, glanced at the drawing and sighed. "You're so much like her," she said flatly, not as a compliment. When I looked up, she was already turning away. That was the night I heard her tell my father. She was too sentimental. That's why people took advantage of her. Something cracked open inside me then, a small, quiet fracture that never quite healed. I realized my mother feared love the way most people fear loss. She thought control could save her from pain, but all it did was spread it around like a contagion. After the funeral, I started planning my escape. I'd been accepted into a design program at the University of Washington. When I told my parents, my mother frowned. "Art, Hannah, it's not practical. You could go to community college here, study something stable." "I already accepted," I said. She pressed her lips together. "I just hope you know what you're doing." That night I packed quietly while they slept. Before I left, Grandma's old sketchbook sat waiting on my desk. Inside, tucked between 2 pages, was an envelope with $50 and a note in her handwriting. "Go make your world colorful." I took the first bus out of Connecticut at midnight. The windows fogged from the cold, my reflection faint in the glass. The towns blurred behind me, familiar houses shrinking into nothing. Somewhere between states, I opened my sketchbook and drew a single line across the page. It didn't mean anything, not yet. But it felt like breathing. When dawn broke over the highway, I promised myself I'd build a life that didn't depend on being chosen. I thought distance would heal everything. I thought if I worked hard enough, the old wounds would fade. But I didn't understand then that some pain doesn't vanish, it just learns to hide. The bus pulled into Seattle wrapped in morning mist. I stepped off, suitcase in one hand, sketchbook in the other. The air smelled of coffee and salt water. I felt small, but for the first time the smallness didn't feel like shame. It felt like starting over. Years later, when I stood in my Denver apartment staring at the photos of my sister's wedding, that same smallness returned. The distance hadn't saved me, it had only made the silence echo louder. I looked around the quiet room, the unwashed mug, the fading light, and realized how little had changed. On the shelf beside my desk, Grandma's sketchbook waited, its edges frayed, the pages worn from years of use. I opened it slowly. Between two drawings, a stormy seascape and a portrait of myself at 15, was the note I'd carried all this time. You are not the quiet one. You are the steady one. The words blurred as I read them. Grandma had seen what none of them ever did. That silence wasn't my weakness. It was my strength waiting to speak. I closed the book, running my fingers over the worn cover. Outside, rain tapped softly against the window, steady and rhythmic. I whispered to the empty room, "You can't erase what was never loud." That night I sat at my desk and opened a new page, sketching a girl standing in a hallway full of doors. Some were closed, some open, and one, just one, was glowing with light. For the first time in years, I didn't feel trapped behind it. I felt ready to walk through. The internet made my family look perfect. It always does. A week after I'd found the photos of Clara's wedding, I thought the ache might dull, that time would wrap the wound in gauze. But on a gray Monday morning, while the rain traced long, silent lines down my windows, my phone buzzed again. Someone had tagged me in a post. I almost didn't look. I was halfway through a design draft, a cup of cold coffee beside me, when curiosity won. The post came from a lifestyle magazine, Modern Vows, featured Family of the Month, the Blakes of New Haven. I froze. There it was again, the image that haunted me. Clara in her lace gown, my parents standing behind her, smiling with practiced warmth. The caption read, "A perfect family celebrating love, tradition, and enduring legacy." Below it, an article spread sang praises of Margaret and Thomas Blake's commitment to family values. Legacy. That word felt like a blade. My father used to say it like a commandment. "Family is our legacy, Hannah. Don't embarrass it." I scrolled through the photos with the numb precision of someone picking at a bruise. Each picture was a mirror reflecting what I'd never been allowed to see. The vineyard sparkled under golden light. My parents' hands overlapped as they raised champagne. Clara beamed every angle, polished her life, a perfect exhibit of what my mother called Blake standards. The last photo caught me off guard. My father giving a toast, his glass high, his eyes full of pride. For a moment, I tried to remember if he'd ever looked at me like that. I couldn't. The comments below swarmed like bees. Beautiful family, so much grace and unity. Goals, then, one caught my eye. "Didn't they have another daughter?" Someone replied. "Maybe she's private. Or the troubled one. There's always one." I stared at those words until they blurred. Always one. I set my phone down gently on the counter, as though if I moved too fast, it would break me. My chest felt tight, like something inside was collapsing in on itself. They had crafted perfection so seamlessly that even strangers believed it. My absence wasn't an oversight, it was design. The phone buzzed again. "Lydia, hey, are you okay? I saw the article. Didn't want to send it, but..." I typed back, "I'm fine," then deleted it, wrote again. "They look happy. Deleted that too. Finally, I sent nothing. The rain outside deepened, blurring the glass. I watched my reflection merge with the gray sky. For a moment, it looked like I was fading into the background the same way I'd always done. The next day, Aunt Lillian called. Her voice came through the speaker, warm and raspy, like old paper. "Sweetheart, I saw that piece in Modern Vows. You weren't in a single photo. I swallowed hard. That's because I wasn't there." "Oh," she said softly. "Your mother told everyone you were too busy with work." I didn't believe her. A sharp laugh escaped me, bitter and hollow. She never believed me when I said I was busy with anything that mattered to me. There was a pause. "She's rewriting the story again, Hannah. She's been doing that for years. The difference now is she's doing it in public." Something cracked inside me then, not anger but recognition. Aunt Lillian had always seen what others ignored. She'd been the quiet witness at birthdays, at Christmas dinners, the one who met my eyes when everyone else looked at Clara. "She always said reputation was more important than fairness," I murmured. "That's because she was raised to survive through appearances. But you don't have to live that way." I wanted to thank her, but my throat burned. When the call ended, I sat for a long time, staring at the silent phone, feeling the weight of her words pressed down like truth, finally spoken aloud. That night, I dreamed of the first family photo we ever took together. I was 16, standing in our front yard while Mom fussed over collars and hair. Everyone wore white except me. I had chosen a dark blue sweater. "Don't ruin the symmetry," she snapped, her tone low but cutting. "It's just a sweater. Just take it off." When I refused, she sighed loudly and told the photographer to take 2 versions, one with me, one without. I remember the flash, the click, and the cold air against my cheeks. When the photos were printed, the one without me hung in the living room. I didn't have to ask why. That memory followed me into the present like a shadow that never left. I'd been cropped out long before the wedding. By Wednesday, the magazine post had been shared hundreds of times. My inbox filled with polite messages from old classmates. "Saw your sister's wedding. Beautiful." As if they hadn't noticed the missing daughter. That evening, I called my mother. She picked up on the second ring. Her tone was calm, almost rehearsed. "Hannah, congratulations," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "You and Dad look amazing. The article called you a symbol of family unity. That must feel nice," she sighed. "If you're calling to be sarcastic, I'm calling to ask why you keep pretending I don't exist." Her silence was long, sharp. "You're overreacting again. It's just a photo. You hate being in them anyway. It's not just a photo. It's my life you keep editing out. Hannah, stop." I didn't want to invite tension into Clara's wedding. "You always find a way to make things harder than they need to be." "You mean harder than perfect," I corrected. "Perfect keeps peace," she said, her voice tightening. "You wouldn't understand." My hands trembled, but my tone didn't. "You're right. I don't understand peace that needs someone erased." Before she could respond, I hung up. The next morning, my phone lit up with a message from Dad. "We love you, Hannah. You're just different. Mom does what she thinks is best." Different. The word landed like a familiar bruise. At noon, Lydia appeared at my door unannounced, holding 2 coffees. "You look like you need this." I took it, managing a smile. "You shouldn't have read that article. You think I could avoid it. Everyone at the agency saw it." Her expression softened. "You don't have to handle this alone." I shook my head. "I've been handling it alone my whole life. I'm good at it." She frowned. "You could call them out publicly. Tell your side." I stared at her. "And become the villain in their perfect story. That's exactly what they expect me to do." She sighed, frustrated. "Then what? Just let them win. It's not about winning anymore." I looked out the window at the falling rain. "It's about not playing." That night, the storm outside thickened. I turned off every light in the apartment and sat by the glow of my laptop screen. The cursor blinked on a blank page. I didn't write a statement or a post or an angry message. I just typed a single sentence in the Notes app. They built peace on my absence. The next morning, I deleted the family group chat. Each name disappeared from the list one by one: Mom, Dad, Clara. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like a quiet funeral. Days later, another email from Modern Vows appeared in my inbox, an automatic newsletter promoting next month's feature. I didn't open it. I blocked the sender, shut my laptop, and turned toward the easel near my window. I picked up a pencil and began sketching. The lines came slowly at first, then faster. A long table. 4 chairs. 3 occupied, 1 empty. The faces blurred, but the space where I should have been, glowed brighter than anything else on the page. When I was done, I sat back and studied it. It wasn't a sad picture. It was honest. They could have their legacy, their image, their perfect symmetry. I finally understood what I had. Silence. And the power to decide what it meant. It's strange how easy disappearing becomes when no one's looking for you. By the time the sun slipped behind the Denver skyline, my apartment looked less like a home and more like a museum of someone who'd stopped existing. Boxes lined the hallway labeled in black marker: books, supplies, art. The kitchen counter was bare, except for the silver bracelet I'd taken off weeks ago. I hadn't touched it since the day of Clara's wedding. It glinted under the yellow light, small and silent, like a memory that didn't know it was dead. I sat on the floor with my back against the couch, watching the city turn into 1,000 tiny windows of light. Somewhere out there, people were heading home to someone waiting for them. I'd stopped expecting that kind of belonging a long time ago. My laptop chimed from the desk. A new email. Not from work, not from anyone important, just a reminder to renew my lease. I stared at the message for a full minute, then hit delete. That was the moment I decided to go. Not out of anger, not as an act of rebellion, but out of exhaustion. I wanted quiet that didn't feel like punishment. I started packing at midnight. The rhythm of it felt like breathing: fold, tape, label, repeat. Each sound small and deliberate, like I was erasing my existence one cardboard box at a time. By 2 in the morning, the floor was clean, the walls bare. All that was left were my sketchbooks and a coffee mug with a chipped handle. Before I went to bed, I opened my phone and scrolled to the Blake family group chat. The last message was still from Mom months ago, a reminder about Clara's bridal shower. I stared at her name, then at Dad's, then Clara's. My thumb hovered over delete. I whispered goodbye and pressed it. The screen went blank. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was clear, like a door closing on a storm. In the morning, I drafted a message to my mother. "You don't need to worry about me anymore. I won't make trouble again." I stared at it for a while, imagining her reading it, maybe sighing with relief, maybe not even noticing. Then, I deleted it. She didn't deserve to know where I was going, or that I'd finally stopped trying to be found. While packing my files, I came across an old email thread titled "Family Legacy." My father's name was on it, along with their lawyers. It was from years ago, back when I was still in college. The words blurred together terms like beneficiaries and trust revisions. I remembered how proud he'd been of that word, legacy. It wasn't about love. It was about what would be left behind, what could be controlled. Even then, I'd known I wasn't part of it. I shut the laptop. No inheritance could fix what had already been stolen. By noon, I called my landlord. "I'll be out by the end of the week." "You breaking the lease?" he asked. "Just breaking even," I said, and hung up. That evening, I stood in the middle of the empty apartment holding the last of my things, a box of paints and Grandma's sketchbook. Everything else was replaceable. Those weren't. I slipped the sketchbook into my bag, taped the final box shut, and left the keys on the counter. As I reached the door, I glanced back once. The room looked hollow, stripped of color, of noise, of history. For a moment, I saw myself there, sitting by the window, painting late at night, waiting for a text that never came. Then I closed the door. At the post office the next morning, I returned the family P.O. box key. The clerk, an older man with kind eyes, asked forwarding address. I smiled faintly. "No, thank you." He looked confused. "You're sure completely?" Outside, the air was sharp with cold. The city felt different when you had no reason to stay. Before I left Denver, I stopped by the small studio where I used to paint with my old coworkers. Lydia was there, bent over a canvas, earbuds in. When she looked up and saw me, her eyes widened. "You're leaving," she said. I nodded. "I think it's time." She crossed her arms. "You don't have to run away." "I'm not running," I said. "I'm just tired of standing still." Lydia sighed, then gave me a long look. "Go make something beautiful out there, okay? And when you're ready, send a postcard, even if it's blank." I hugged her. "You'll know it's from me." Driving out of Denver felt like peeling away a layer of my skin. The highway stretched east-wide and endless. The sky shifted from steel gray to pale blue as the city lights disappeared in the rearview mirror. Each mile felt lighter, like gravity itself was loosening its grip. At a gas station on the outskirts, I bought a map I didn't need and a black coffee I couldn't finish. The cashier asked, "Heading somewhere or getting away?" "Both," I said. He smiled like he understood. Maybe he did. I drove until the sun began to fall behind me. The landscape changed slowly, mountains flattening into open plains, winter trees giving way to long stretches of nothing. I rolled down the window, letting the wind sting my face. It was the first real feeling I'd had in days. When night came, I pulled over at a rest stop. The parking lot was almost empty. A single truck idled nearby, headlights dim. I sat there for a while, engine off, hands resting on the wheel. It struck me that for the first time in my life, no one knew where I was. No one expected me anywhere. "Freedom didn't roar," it whispered. I opened my bag and pulled out Grandma's sketchbook. On the inside cover, in her handwriting, were words I'd read 1,000 times. "You are not the quiet one. You are the steady one." I traced the letters with my fingertip, then added my own beneath them, "steady enough to leave." That night, I rented a small motel room off the highway. The place smelled faintly of bleach and rain. I lay on the bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of trucks passing by outside. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed. I thought about my parents, how Mom would be trimming flowers in the kitchen, how Dad would be reading the evening paper, how Clara would be somewhere shining. I wondered if they noticed my silence yet, or if it just folded neatly into their routine like it always had. I didn't cry. The tears had been spent long before this. Instead, I reached for a notepad by the nightstand and began to write, not to them but to myself. "You tried. You stayed too long in places that didn't see you. You can't heal where you were erased. Peace isn't what they give you, it's what you take back." When I finished, I folded the note and slipped it into the sketchbook, my own letter to the person I was finally becoming. Before dawn, I was back on the road. The horizon was a thin line of gold against the gray sky. It felt like a beginning. As I crossed into Kansas, I whispered into the empty car, "They'll tell themselves I vanished because I'm ungrateful. But I vanished because I'm free." The words hung in the air, soft but certain. I drove for hours past small towns and bare fields until the signs began to read, "Welcome to Missouri." The world outside looked washed clean after a night of rain. At one point, I pulled over to stretch, standing beside the car as the wind tugged at my coat. The fields rippled under the morning light, endless and untamed. I thought of Mom's voice calling me too much. Too sensitive, too independent, too loud when I spoke, too quiet when I didn't. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was too much for their version of love. But out here, surrounded by nothing but sky and air, I didn't feel like too much. I felt just enough. When the sun set again, I crossed the state line into Illinois. I didn't know where I'd stop next, only that I would keep driving east until I saw water again, I whispered. "If they wanted peace, they can have it." The wind carried the words away. And for the first time, the silence that followed didn't hurt, it healed. I thought distance would be enough. I was wrong, some ghosts have Wi-Fi. By the time I reached Portland, the city felt damp and alive, its skyline wrapped in morning mist. The air smelled of salt and roasted beans from the cafe below my rented apartment. I'd taken a short-term place near the water, a small studio with white walls and a single window that faced the harbor. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd stay long enough to earn back some savings before deciding what came next. Harbor Creative was a modest agency tucked inside an old brick building near downtown. Inside, everything buzzed softly, keyboards clacking, the hum of conversation, the whir of espresso machines. It was the kind of place that smelled like deadlines and ambition. The team was small, 7 designers, 2 copywriters, 1 creative director. Evelyn Grant, the director, was in her early 50s and carried herself like a woman who had survived every kind of chaos. She was sharp but kind, the sort of boss who still took notes by hand. "You've got an eye for tone," she told me during my first week. "Don't let anyone rush you. Details are your currency." For the first time in a long while, I felt competent, stable. I took morning walks to the harbor with a to-go cup of coffee and spent my evenings sketching by the window. My life had turned into something quiet but steady. Jonas Patel, one of the copywriters, liked to joke that I was the mysterious one. He'd lean over the cubicle wall with a grin. "We don't do drama here, Hannah. Only deadlines." I'd smile back. "Then I'm already home." It wasn't friendship exactly, but it was warmth, the kind that didn't ask for explanations. Even Lydia, who worked remotely from Seattle, started checking in again. She'd call during lunch breaks to gossip about clients or brainstorm ideas. For a while, it felt like the ache from Denver was softening into something manageable. Then came the phone call. It was a Friday afternoon, gray skies pressing against the windows. I was working on a rebrand for a local coffee company when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I ignored it. It rang again. And again. Finally, I picked up. "Hello," a voice answered, calm and professional. "Miss Blake, this is Evelyn Grant." I frowned. "Evelyn, you're calling from a different number." "I'm sorry," she said gently. "I wanted to reach you directly. We received a rather unusual phone call this morning." I felt my pulse quicken. "From who?" "Someone claiming to be your mother." For a moment I said nothing. The air around me felt thinner. Evelyn continued, her tone cautious. "She said you've been under a lot of stress, that you might not be sleeping well. She implied you weren't emotionally stable enough to handle current deadlines. She said she was worried about you." I gripped the edge of the desk. "She called you." "She sounded sincere, but it was personal," Evelyn said. "I told her I appreciated the concern, but that your performance has been excellent." "She doesn't know anything about my performance," I said quietly. Evelyn hesitated. "I figured as much. I just thought you should know." "Thank you," I managed my throat tight. "I'll handle it." After we hung up, I sat still for a long time, staring at the muted reflection in my screen. My mother hadn't spoken to me since the day of Clara's wedding, and now she'd reached across state lines just to pull the ground from under me. I remembered her words on the phone that day. "You always make things harder than they need to be." Maybe in her world, sabotaging her daughter's job counted as love. Evelyn called me into her office later. Her tone was measured, kind, but cautious. "If you need a few days off, we can arrange it," she said. "I don't want you to feel pressured." "I don't need time off," I replied. "I need boundaries." Evelyn frowned slightly. "This isn't about company policy, Hannah. It's about concern." I forced a smile. "Concern can be another word for control. She's been using it my whole life." Evelyn blinked, unsure what to say. I didn't blame her. There's no HR protocol for surviving your own mother. I left her office and went straight to the bathroom, locking the stall door behind me. I sat on the closed toilet lid, trying to steady my breathing. My hands trembled, not from anger this time, but from the realization that no matter how far I went, she could still find a way to intrude. When I walked back to my desk, Lydia's message popped up on the company chat. "Heard about the call." "You okay?" I typed back. "Define okay." "She called your boss Hannah." "That's insane." "It's not insane. It's familiar." You can't let her win. Winning means playing her game. I'm done playing. Lydia sent a string of angry emojis, then a heart. I'm here, okay, I know, I wrote. And I meant it. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I finished my tasks, joined meetings, smiled when necessary. But by the time everyone packed up to leave, something inside me had hardened. I opened a new email draft addressed to Evelyn. Subject: resignation notice. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed, "Thank you for the opportunity. I've realized peace matters more than proof. Please consider this my 2 weeks' notice." I added one final line. "You believed in my work and that was enough." Then I hit send before I could stop myself. When I stood to leave, Jonas caught my arm. "You're heading out early." "Something came up," I said, forcing a smile. He shrugged. "You'll be back Monday, right?" I didn't answer. Outside, the sky had opened into a steady drizzle. Portland rain, soft, relentless. I walked without an umbrella, letting it soak through my coat. It felt like baptism and surrender all at once. By the time I reached my apartment, I was drenched. I peeled off my jacket, set my phone on the counter, and stared at it. There were missed calls from Lydia and one voicemail from Evelyn. I didn't listen to any of them. Instead, I made tea, sat by the window, and watched the streetlights shimmer against the wet pavement. The rain whispered against the glass, steady and calm. I thought about my mother sitting in her pristine kitchen, scrolling through her phone, maybe telling herself she'd done the right thing. In her mind, she was probably saving me from what I'd never know. But she'd cut the last thread that tied me to any illusion of safety. My phone buzzed again. "Aunt Lillian." "Sweetheart," she said softly. "Your mother called me. She said you quit your job. She made sure of it." Lillian sighed. "I wish I could say I'm surprised." "I'm not," I said. "But I am finished." "What will you do now?" I looked out at the rain. "Something she can't touch." There was a pause, then her voice softened. "Then come here. You need a place to rest." "I think I do. Drive safe," she said. "I'll put the kettle on." After we hung up, I sat for a while, the tea cooling in my hands. The decision was already made. I packed light this time. Just the sketchbook, a few clothes and a half-finished painting I couldn't bear to leave behind. As I zipped the bag shut, I felt the strange calm that comes right after surrender. Not relief exactly, but release. When dawn broke, I loaded my car and took one last look around the studio. The walls still smelled faintly of paint and coffee. It wasn't a failure I was leaving behind, it was a chapter. I started the car and turned onto the empty road leading out of the city. The rain hadn't stopped, but it had softened into mist, the kind that makes the world look half awake. Every mile east felt like breathing again. The lights of Portland faded in the rearview mirror, replaced by long stretches of green and gray. The wipers kept rhythm steady as a heartbeat. At a rest stop outside Salem, I pulled over and scribbled a note on the back of a receipt. "They can't erase me if I disappear first." Then I folded it and tucked it into my sketchbook. When I called Lillian later that afternoon, she sounded relieved. "I'm glad you're coming, Hannah. You've carried this alone long enough." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. Maybe it's time I stopped carrying anything at all. As I drove through the wet Oregon countryside, the clouds began to break. A sliver of sunlight touched the road ahead, pale and golden. For the first time in years, I didn't feel hunted. I just felt free. The road to Connecticut felt longer than it should have, maybe because every mile carried a ghost in the back seat. The hum of the tires was the only sound, steady and hypnotic, until it almost became a lullaby. I'd left before sunrise, the sky barely awake, coffee cooling in the cup holder. Each highway sign felt like a countdown, 400 miles, then 200, then just 50. The closer I got, the smaller I felt, like the years between leaving and returning had folded into nothing. By the time I crossed into my home state, the air smelled of wet pine and distant salt from the coast. The trees stood like silent witnesses on either side of the road, their branches dripping with mist. I hadn't seen Aunt Lillian in nearly a decade, But I could still picture her house, as if I'd left yesterday, the white shutters, the wild garden, the lavender that grew in defiance of New England winters. When I finally pulled into her gravel driveway, the world was gray and soft, the kind of afternoon that felt like it was holding its breath. Her porch light glowed even though it wasn't dark yet. The screen door creaked open before I even stepped out of the car. Lillian appeared, her hair pulled back in a loose bun, her face lined but warm. She wore an old cardigan that hung too big on her shoulders. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she smiled, a small, steady smile that didn't need words. "Come here, sweetheart," she said. Her hug smelled like chamomile tea and wood smoke. It was the kind of embrace that made the years between us dissolve instantly. When she finally stepped back, her eyes lingered on mine, reading what I hadn't said. "You look tired," she murmured. I said simply. "Then, we'll start with tea. Everything's easier with tea." Inside the house felt like time had slowed down decades ago. The walls were lined with old photographs and shelves crowded with books, the kind that smelled like dust and comfort. A quilt was draped over the arm of the sofa, and somewhere in the distance, a clock ticked softly. Lillian poured steaming tea into chipped cups. I wrapped my hands around the warmth and let the silence stretch. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the first silence in months that didn't feel like punishment. "I'm glad you came," she said finally. "Your mother called me after you quit your job." "Of course she did," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "She wanted to make sure you were safe. She wanted to make sure I was quiet," I replied. Lillian studied me for a moment, then sighed. "You're not wrong." We sat that way for a long time, sipping tea, the storm outside brushing softly against the windows. When I finally spoke again, it was with the kind of exhaustion that feels like confession. "I keep waiting for it to stop hurting," I said, "for the distance to make it smaller, but it doesn't. It's like she's built into the walls of my life." Lillian leaned back, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "That's what happens when you grow up inside someone's fear. It echoes even when they're gone." I looked up. "Fear? She's been afraid since before you were born," Lillian said quietly. "Afraid of losing control, of losing love. Your mother thinks if she keeps everything perfect, nothing will leave her. Except me." "Yes," she said, "except you." For the first time in years, the air between us felt like honesty. That night I slept in the guest room that used to belong to Grandma Eleanor. The same slanted ceiling, the same soft creak of floorboards. On the dresser, there was still an old framed photo of her standing in her garden, smiling as if the world couldn't touch her. I reached out and touched the glass. "I wish you were here," I whispered. The next morning, sunlight poured through the window, pale and cool. Lillian was already up, humming softly in the kitchen. She handed me a plate of toast and honey, her eyes glinting. "Eat first, then I want to show you something." We climbed the narrow staircase to the attic, the air heavy with dust and memory. Boxes were stacked neatly along the walls, each labeled in Lillian's tidy handwriting. Books, holiday decor, old family files. She stopped in front of a wooden trunk. "I found this a few years ago," she said, kneeling beside it. "It belonged to your grandmother." Inside were bundles of letters tied with ribbon, a few old sketch pads, and faded photographs. The paper smelled of cedar and thyme. My hands trembled as I picked one envelope at random. The handwriting was unmistakable, looped and elegant. To Margaret it read, "My mother's name." I unfolded it carefully. The ink was smudged in places, but the words were still clear. "Margaret, love cannot control. It can only hold softly. What you fear losing, you will lose faster by tightening your grip." I stared at the words until they blurred. "She wrote that after your mother's miscarriage," Lillian said quietly. I looked up sharply. "Her what?" Lillian's voice softened. 2 years before you were born. It was bad. The doctor said she might never carry again. When she finally had you, she couldn't let go of the fear. It turned into something else. Control, perfection, distance." My heart pounded in my chest. She never told me. She doesn't talk about pain. She builds around it. I sank to the floor, the letter still trembling in my hands. For years, I'd painted my mother as a villain, cold, unyielding, deliberate. Now the edges blurred. She was still all those things, but behind them was something more fragile, something that looked a little like grief. She punished me for being alive, I whispered. No, Lillian said gently. She punished herself for being afraid. You just happened to be where it landed. I pressed the letter to my chest, my throat burning. That doesn't make it okay. It doesn't, she agreed. But it makes it understandable. We sat there in the quiet attic, the only sound the creak of the house settling. Dust floated in the air like tiny ghosts. She loved you, Lillian said after a while. In her own broken way. I let out a shaky laugh. That's the thing about broken love. It cuts both ways. Lillian reached out and placed a hand over mine. You can understand her without excusing her. Something inside me shifted then, small but real. Not forgiveness yet, but a crack in the armor. Before we went back downstairs, I noticed another envelope tucked beneath the pile. This one was sealed, my name written across the front in the same looping script. To Hannah, it said, for when you're ready. My breath caught. She wrote to me. Lillian hesitated. Your mother found it after Eleanor passed. She never gave it to you. Why, maybe she thought you weren't ready. Maybe she wasn't. I turned the envelope over in my hands. The paper was soft with age, the seal slightly loose. I didn't open it. Not yet. I just held it, feeling the weight of everything that had been hidden between generations of women who couldn't say the right words out loud. That evening, as the sun melted into gold over the garden, I sat on the porch steps with the unopened letter in my lap. The air smelled of lavender and rain. Lillian brought out 2 mugs of tea and sat beside me. You don't have to read it tonight, she said. I know. Sometimes the truth can wait a little longer. It doesn't go anywhere. I nodded. The envelope fluttered slightly in the breeze. I think I'm finally starting to understand her, I said softly. Lillian smiled faintly. That's the first step to forgiving her. I looked at the horizon, the sky stretched wide and soft. And the second, forgiving yourself for needing her. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of the sea from somewhere far off. I closed my eyes and breathed it in. For the first time in years, it didn't hurt to remember. It just existed. When the light faded and the first stars appeared, I stood and held the letter close. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow I'll read it. But for tonight, I just wanted to sit there in the quiet where the ghosts finally felt like company instead of chains. Aunt Lillian's house smelled like lavender, and rain, the kind of scent that made you slow down whether you wanted to or not. For the first time in months, maybe years, I woke up without an alarm. No meeting, no emails, no one waiting on the other end of a screen. The morning light fell in soft stripes across the quilt, and the silence wasn't sharp anymore, it was gentle. Downstairs, I found Lillian humming in the kitchen, the radio low, a pot of coffee already brewing. She turned when she saw me, her smile tired but kind. Sleep all right like a stone, I said. She slid a cup toward me. Good. You looked like you hadn't in a while. I took a sip. It was too hot, bitter, grounding. I didn't realize how much noise I'd been living in until it stopped. That's what this house does, she said, stirring her tea. It holds quiet. Your grandmother used to say silence was its own kind of prayer. Maybe that's why Mom hated visiting, I said before I could stop myself. Lillian gave me a look that was half sadness, half understanding. Probably. We ate breakfast slowly, toast, honey, soft eggs. The rain outside had turned into mist, clinging to the window panes like breath. Every now and then she'd glance at me as if she wanted to ask something but didn't. Finally, she said, "You ready to see the attic?" I hesitated, but curiosity won. "What's up there?" "Your grandmother's things," she said, "and something she left for you." The attic stairs groaned under our weight. Dust danced in the thin shafts of light breaking through the old skylight. Lillian opened a small window and the air shifted, carrying the scent of cedar and age. Boxes lined the walls, each labeled in her tidy handwriting. Eleanor's letters, old photos, summer clothes. She knelt by a wooden chest in the corner and opened it carefully. Inside was a small bundle wrapped in faded blue fabric. She called this her keepsake box, Lillian said softly. She wanted you to have it. I sat cross-legged on the floor as she placed it in my lap. My fingers trembled as I untied the ribbon. Inside were sketches, postcards, and a stack of letters tied with twine. The first envelope I pulled out was addressed to Margaret Blake, my mother. I unfolded it gently. The handwriting was elegant, confident, the ink slightly faded. Margaret, it began. Love cannot control, it can only hold softly. What you fear losing, you will lose faster by tightening your grip. The words blurred. I had to blink to steady them. She wrote that after your mother's miscarriage, Lillian said quietly, her voice soft enough to blend with the rain. I looked up. What Lillian sighed, sitting beside me. Before you were born, she lost a baby. It nearly broke her. The doctors said it would be difficult to try again. When you came along, she couldn't separate love from fear anymore. She loved you, but she was terrified. Every choice after that was about control. I set the letter down carefully. She never told me. She doesn't talk about pain, Lillian said. She hides it under rules. That's her armor. For a long moment, all I could hear was the faint rustle of paper and the steady ticking of the old clock on the wall. My throat tightened. So she punished me for being the one who survived. She punished herself, Lillian said softly. You just stood in the line of fire. The attic suddenly felt too small, the air too heavy. I pressed my palms to my knees, trying to breathe. I used to think she didn't love me, I whispered. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe she just didn't know how. That's not your fault, Hannah, Lillian said. You were never supposed to fix her. Her words broke something in me I didn't realize was still holding on. The tears came slow at first, then all at once. I didn't hide them. Lillian sat quietly beside me, not saying anything, not touching me, just there. When the sobs finally subsided, I felt lighter, like I'd let go of a weight I'd been carrying so long, I'd forgotten it wasn't part of me. Keep reading, she said gently. There's more. I reached for another bundle of letters. The next one wasn't addressed to anyone. Inside was a simple message in Grandma's looping script. Forgiveness isn't about the one who hurt you. It's about freeing the part of yourself still living in the wound. Something inside me shifted. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was something close, an opening, a softening. I put the letters aside and reached for the last thing in the box, a smaller envelope sealed in wax, my name written across the front. To Hannah, for when you're ready. I held it carefully, the paper thin and fragile against my fingers. Your mother found that after Eleanor died, Lillian said quietly. She never gave it to you. Why, maybe she wasn't ready for you to hear from her mother again, Lillian said. Or maybe she thought it would remind you of what she couldn't give. I didn't open it. Not yet. I just stared at my name written in the hand of the only person who had ever truly seen me. We carried the box downstairs. The rain had stopped by the time we reached the kitchen. Lillian brewed another pot of tea, the scent of chamomile filling the air. I sat at the table, the unopened letter in front of me. You don't have to read it today, she said. I know, I replied, but I think I want to. I broke the seal carefully. The letter inside was short, written in black ink that had faded to gray. My dear girl, it read. You are not invisible. You were born to bring color to the quiet places. When they make you feel too much, remember, it's because they feel too little. My breath caught. I read it again, slower this time. The words sank into me like light through water. Tears slid down my cheeks, silent and clean. I pressed the letter to my chest. She knew, I whispered. She always knew. Lillian placed her hand over mine. She did, and now you do too. We didn't speak for a while. Outside, the clouds began to break apart, a thin beam of sunlight slipping through and warming the window pane. I felt something inside me begin to warm with it. That evening, I walked down to the edge of the property, where the woods opened into a small clearing. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. I stood there for a long time looking up at the gray sky slowly shifting toward blue. Maybe forgiveness isn't a door, I said quietly to no one. Maybe it's just a window finally opening. When I turned back toward the house, Lillian was standing on the porch holding 2 mugs of tea. She smiled when she saw me. "You look different," she said when I reached her. "I think I finally stopped fighting ghosts," I said. She handed me a mug. "Good, because there's more to the story, and you deserve to know all of it." I raised an eyebrow. More, she nodded toward the living room table where a folder sat, its edges frayed and papers neatly stacked inside. "It's about your parents," she said quietly. "You need to see what they've done." The evening light caught her face, soft but serious. My heart gave a slow, heavy thud. "Are you sure I'm ready for this?" I asked. She gave a small smile, the kind that carried both sorrow and pride. "You're stronger than you think, Hannah. You've always been ready. You just didn't know it yet." I looked back once at the fading light over the trees. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of what the truth might take from me, only what hiding it had already cost. I thought I was done being surprised by them. I was wrong. It was late afternoon when Aunt Lillian's car crunched across the gravel driveway. I'd been sketching in the kitchen, trying to catch the soft gray light spilling through the window. When I saw the passenger door open, I expected groceries or maybe one of her church friends. Instead, a woman stepped out in a long beige coat, clutching a folder to her chest. Her hair was pulled back tight, her expression careful. The moment I recognized her, my chest tightened. "Cynthia Morris," I whispered. Lillian glanced toward me. "You remember her?" How could I forget? Cynthia had been the family lawyer since I was 12. She was the one who drew up the trust fund, handled the estate, attended every Christmas dinner where I sat in silence while adults talked about legacy like it was a living thing. Cynthia walked into the kitchen, shaking rain from her coat. Her eyes softened when she saw me. "Hannah, you look well. That makes one of us," I said. Lillian shot me a warning look, but Cynthia didn't seem offended. She placed the folder on the table and took a slow breath. "I didn't come here to upset you. But there's something you need to see, something your parents signed last month." I looked at the folder, but didn't reach for it. "You drove all the way here from New Haven for paperwork." "I drove here because your mother asked me not to tell you," she said quietly. And I couldn't live with that. The kitchen clock ticked once, twice. The rain outside started again, faint and rhythmic. Lillian poured her a cup of tea and sat beside me. "Just show her, Cynthia." Cynthia nodded and opened the folder. Inside were neatly clipped documents stamped and notarized. I caught my father's signature before I saw the title printed at the top. Blake Family Estate, Amendment of Beneficiaries. My eyes skimmed the lines, the words blurring together, until one phrase landed like a blow. "No further beneficiary interest for Hannah Blake." I froze. "This is a joke." Cynthia shook her head. "It's legal and complete. The Queen Anne, house, your father's investments, your grandmother's jewelry, everything has been transferred to Clara and her husband." The sound in my ears changed. It wasn't silence, it was the kind of ringing that happens when your heart forgets what to do next. When I asked. 2 weeks after the wedding, Cynthia said. "Your parents said it was about simplifying the family legacy." "Simplifying," I repeated, almost laughing. "That's a neat word for erasing." Lillian's jaw tightened. "Margaret and Thomas have always hidden cruelty behind politeness." Cynthia's voice softened. "Hannah, I know this is hard to hear, but if you want to contest it, there's a chance. We could argue emotional coercion or undue influence." "No." My voice surprised me, quiet but steady. "I'm not going to court over their money." Lillian frowned. "You could win. It's not just about money, it's about justice." I shook my head. "Justice is exhausting. I'm tired." For a long time, no one spoke. The rain outside grew heavier, the house filled with its muted rhythm. I stared at the papers again. My mother's elegant signature curved perfectly at the bottom of every page. I wondered if her hand had trembled at all. Probably not. Do they even realize what this means? I asked, finally. Cynthia hesitated. They think they're protecting the family's reputation. They said it was what made sense. They always did confuse sense with shame, I muttered. Cynthia reached for her coat. I'll leave the copies with you. Do what you need to with them. After she left the house, felt different, quieter, heavier, as if the walls themselves understood what had been taken. I stayed seated at the table, staring at the folder. Lillian sat across from me, hands folded, her eyes soft with fury. Say something, I whispered. She sighed. I think they just lost the last good part of themselves. I think they never had it, I said. I walked to the sink and splashed cold water on my face. My reflection looked foreign, older, steadier, like someone who'd stopped expecting rescue. When I turned back, Lillian was still watching me. You really don't want to fight this? No, I said simply. Taking them to court would mean being tied to them again. I want out, for good, but they'll keep everything. I smiled faintly. Then let them have the house, the heirlooms, the perfect legacy. I'll keep what they could never own, peace. Lillian's eyes glistened. She reached across the table and took my hand. You've grown stronger than any of them, you know that I had to, I said. It was the only way to survive them. After dinner, I carried the folder upstairs to the guest room. The house was quiet except for the rain and the faint ticking of the old clock. I opened my sketchbook and pulled out a pencil. For a while I just stared at the blank page. Then I began to draw. It started as the outline of a house, a big one, with ivy crawling up its walls. Then I drew cracks running through the foundation. Inside I sketched 4 silhouettes seated around a table. 3 were connected by thin, tangled lines. The 4th sat apart, her outline clear, unbroken. When I finished, I wrote one word beneath it: inheritance. The next morning I woke to sunlight spilling through the window. It felt wrong that the world looked beautiful when everything had just been confirmed ugly. I went downstairs to find Lillian reading by the window glasses perched low on her nose. You're up early, she said without looking up. Couldn't sleep. She set the book aside. Coffee's ready. I poured a cup and joined her on the porch. The rain had stopped, the garden shimmered, drops of light clinging to every leaf. I used to think forgiveness meant letting people back in, I said quietly. Now I think it just means walking away without turning around. Lillian smiled faintly. That sounds like something your grandmother would have said. I sipped the coffee, the warmth grounding me. She was right about everything, wasn't she? She usually was. For a while we just sat there listening to the world, waking up birds, calling from the trees, the hum of distant traffic. It was peaceful in a way that almost felt undeserved. When the mail truck came rumbling up the road, I didn't think much of it until the driver waved. You Hannah Blake, he called. Yes. He handed me a thick envelope stamped from a law firm in New Haven. Lillian frowned. More, I tore it open carefully. Inside was a formal notice confirming the asset transfer. Attached was a single note handwritten in my father's neat penmanship. Hannah, we hope you'll understand this decision was made with love. You've chosen a different path, and that's all right. We only wish you happiness. My throat burned as I read it. Lillian snatched the paper from my hand. Love, she said, incredulous. They call this love. I laughed softly, but it sounded hollow. That's how they justify it. They've always mistaken control for care. I folded the note, slipped it back into the envelope, and set it on the table beside me. I don't need their money, I said. I just need them to stop existing in my head. You can't erase blood, Lillian said gently. I can dilute it, I replied. That night, I stood by the window, the moonlight spilling over the desk where my sketchbook lay open. I traced the drawing. I'd made the woman at the edge of the table still whole, still separate. Then I added something new, a door behind her opening to a wide blank space. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, carrying the faint scent of the sea. I thought of my parents sitting in their perfect house, surrounded by their trophies of success, polishing frames that would never include me again. Let them. They'd built their kingdom on silence, and for years I'd believed my only power was to speak. But now I knew better. Silence could be a weapon too sharp and steady. Before bed, I wrote one final note in the margin of my sketchbook. They erased me from their will, but I was never part of their story. Now I get to write mine. I closed the book and turned off the light. The darkness that filled the room wasn't heavy. It was clean, like the kind that comes before dawn. The sea doesn't ask questions. It just takes what you give and hands back silence. I reached Cape Cod after driving through 3 states in one long stretch of gray sky and fading leaves. The cabin I'd rented sat at the end of a narrow dirt road, surrounded by wind-shaped pines and tall grass bending toward the ocean. The paint was chipped, the porch uneven, the air thick with salt and quiet. It was exactly what I needed, somewhere far enough that even memories had to travel to find me. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine and seaweed. One small bedroom, a wooden table by the window, a sink that moaned when you turned the faucet. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I unpacked only the essentials: clothes, sketchbook, a few pencils, and Grandma Eleanor's letter folded neatly between the pages. The first morning I woke before sunrise. The world outside was a gray watercolor, the horizon still deciding where to begin. I made coffee on the small stove and carried it to the porch. The waves moved in slow rhythm, each one erasing the one before it. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence. I just watched the tide. My days fell into a pattern. Coffee, painting, walking along the beach until my hair tangled with the wind. I sketched what I saw, but never quite what was there. The crooked fence posts, the shells half buried in sand, the bruised color of the morning sky. I painted feelings more than landscapes, lines that drifted between memory and sea foam. Sometimes I talked out loud just to hear my own voice again. "You'd like it here, Grandma," I'd whisper. "It's messy and beautiful, just like your art." The nights came early, the air sharp with the scent of rain. I'd sit by the window with a blanket and listen to the ocean breathing. It felt like living inside a heartbeat. One morning I spilled my coffee across the porch railing. "Well done," I muttered to myself, watching the brown liquid drip through the cracks. A voice called from next door, easy and amused. "Morning accident." I turned. A man stood a few yards away, holding a rolled-up blueprint under his arm. He looked about my age, maybe a few years older. Sun-touched skin, dark hair, pushed back by the wind, a day or two of stubble. "Guess so," I said. "I was testing gravity." "Seems it's still working," he replied with a grin. "You must be my new neighbor." "Only temporarily," I said. He stepped closer, offering a hand. "Daniel Moore. I'm an architect. They hired me to restore the cabin next to yours." "Hannah," I said, shaking his hand. His grip was warm, steady. "Well, Hannah," he said, looking around, "you picked the quietest stretch of coastline in the state. Either you're running from something or running toward peace." "Something in between," I said. He smiled, eyes narrowing slightly. "Then you're in the right place." Over the next few days, I'd see him working outside, measuring boards, sketching notes on a clipboard. Sometimes he'd wave, sometimes not. It was a polite rhythm, two strangers sharing the same silence. One afternoon, I came back from a walk and found him kneeling by my porch steps, hammering a loose board. "You really don't have to do that," I said. He looked up, his smile quick. "Can't help it. Broken things bother me. That must make life exhausting." He laughed. "It does, but fixing them feels better than pretending they're fine." Something in me softened at that. "Fair enough," I said. "You win this one." He stood brushing sawdust from his hands. "If you ever need help with anything around here, knock on the wall. The sound carries." Noted. Later that evening, I painted while he worked next door. The soft thud of his hammering kept pace with the waves. It was strangely comforting, a reminder that something nearby was being rebuilt. The next morning, he appeared with 2 mugs of coffee. "Consider this my apology for interrupting your peace yesterday," he said. "I wasn't exactly meditating," I said, taking the mug. "Just painting badly." He looked past me into the cabin. "Can I see?" "No," I said quickly, then laughed. "They're not ready." "Fair enough. I'll earn an invitation." He leaned on the porch railing, watching the horizon. "I used to come here with my dad," he said quietly. "He'd draw blueprints in the sand and call them dreams. I guess I'm still chasing his sketches." I studied him for a moment. "Did he get to see what you built?" "Some of it," he said. "He died 2 years ago. That's when I stopped designing cities and started fixing places like this." I nodded. Rebuilding can be its own kind of creation. He smiled, the kind that carried both loss and peace. Exactly. After he left, I thought about his words for a long time. Rebuilding. Not replacing, not erasing, just reshaping what still had life in it. That night, I opened my sketchbook again and began something new. Instead of gray and storm, I painted light breaking through clouds, soft gold on water. By the end of the week, our days had fallen into rhythm. He worked with wood and nails, I worked with paint and silence. Sometimes we'd share coffee at sunrise, other times we'd talk as the sky turned orange. He never asked what I was running from, and I never told him. That unspoken space felt sacred. One evening, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin windows. Daniel knocked on my door, holding 2 mugs of cider. "You shouldn't sit through a storm alone," he said. "It's just rain," I replied, but I let him in. We sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, the air filled with the hiss of rain and distant thunder. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. "What? Whatever you left behind." I watched the water swell under the lightning. "No, I miss who I was before I kept trying to earn people's love." He glanced at me, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe that's the version of you you're rebuilding here." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I'm just learning how to breathe." He nodded slowly. "That's rebuilding too." We drank in silence after that. When the thunder faded, he set his cup down and looked at the waves. "You know," he said, "storms never last. But they change the shape of the coast every time they come." I smiled faintly. "Then maybe this one will give me a new shoreline." He left after the rain stopped. I watched his figure disappear into the dark, the sound of his footsteps blending with the sea. The next morning, I stood at the edge of the water. The sky was clear, the air sharp and new. The ocean glittered with the pale light of renewal. I whispered to the waves, "I forgive you," though I wasn't sure who I meant, my mother, my past, or myself. I stayed until the tide reached my ankles, cool and alive, then walked back to the cabin. Inside, I looked at the unfinished canvas leaning against the wall. The woman I'd painted before, the one walking away from a house, still stood there, her back to the viewer, her dress caught in the wind. But now, for the first time, I added a horizon of color ahead of her. Gold, soft and endless. That evening, Daniel stopped by holding a small wooden carving of a seashell. "Found this while clearing driftwood," he said. "It reminded me of your paintings." "It's beautiful," I said. "Thank you." He nodded toward the canvas behind me. "You added light?" "Yeah," I said, smiling. "I think I finally earned it." He studied me for a moment, then said softly, "You look peaceful." "I feel it," I admitted. He grinned. "Then my work here is done." He left me standing there, laughing quietly to myself. That night, I painted until the candle burned low, the smell of salt and pine filling the room. Outside, the tide pulled back steady and sure, reshaping the coast once more. When I finally put down my brush, I whispered to the empty room, "They can keep their legacy. I'll keep my life." And for the first time, it didn't feel like defiance. It felt like freedom. I thought I had outrun them, but ghosts have a way of finding signal. It started with a text from Lydia one gray morning. The tide was low, the air smelled of salt and fog, and I'd just finished sketching the outline of a gull in flight. My phone buzzed once, twice. Lydia's name flashed across the screen. "Have you seen this?" she wrote, followed by a link. I hesitated. I'd been careful not to look at anything connected to my family for weeks. But curiosity, that old sickness, still had its hooks in me. I tapped the link. The headline hit like a wave, breaking cold over my chest. "The perfect Blake family legacy, love and a wedding to remember." Below it was a photo my parents and Clara smiling in front of the vineyard's golden fields. The article was from the Seattle Chronicle, written in glowing language that could have been lifted straight from one of my mother's holiday speeches. Margaret and Thomas Blake exemplify grace, unity, and enduring family values, it read. I scrolled each line, slicing deeper. Daughter Clara and her husband Ethan Carter recently celebrated their marriage in Napa Valley, surrounded by family and friends. Family and friends, the image froze me, their hands raised in a toast glasses catching sunlight. My father's face proud, my mother radiant. Clara looked blissful, framed like an angel in white. There was no empty chair, no missing person, no sign that I had ever existed. The comments section was alive with admiration. Beautiful family, so inspiring goals. Then, one caught my eye. Didn't they have another daughter? The reply came fast. Maybe she's private or the rebellious one. Every perfect family has one. I set the phone down gently before the anger could rise, before the words could crawl under my skin and root there. Outside, the sea rolled calmly. It was almost cruel how peaceful the world could be while you were breaking again. Minutes passed, then the phone rang. Lydia. I answered on the third ring. Please tell me you didn't read the comments, she said, skipping hello. I did, I said softly. I always do. They make you sound like a ghost, like you never existed. I stared at the water. Maybe that's their plan. Her voice cracked with disbelief. You can't just let them do that, Hannah. You can't let them rewrite you out of your own family. I already stopped being in it, I said. They're just catching up. Post something, she urged. Tell your side. I'm not interested in performing pain so people will believe it. Lydia sighed, frustrated. You're too calm. I'd be furious. I used to be, I admitted. Now I'm just tired. Then what will you do? I don't know. I said, though I already did. Maybe nothing. After we hung up, I stood on the porch for a long time staring at the horizon. The waves came and went, obedient to no one. By noon, the story had spread. My email filled with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years, college classmates, distant relatives, old colleagues. Some said they'd seen my family's feature. Others sent awkward condolences without realizing what they were really saying. You must be so proud of your sister. Your parents look amazing. One message read simply, thinking of you, with no explanation. That one hurt most of all. By evening, Daniel knocked on my door. He was holding a small toolbox, but his eyes said he already knew. You look like someone who's been punched, he said. I motioned him inside. You ever feel like your life keeps playing on someone else's screen? He frowned. Bad news. They were in the paper. Again, my family. He tilted his head. The ones who left you out, now they've upgraded. They've made me fictional. Daniel set down the toolbox, leaned against the wall. You could tell the truth. And sound bitter. No one likes a woman who ruins her family's image. They'll call it resentment, not honesty. He was quiet for a moment, then said, Let them have their applause. That kind of perfection always costs someone. I smiled weakly. It already did. Later, when he left, I opened my laptop and stared at the blank screen. My hand hovered over the keyboard. Lydia's words echoed, Tell your side. Instead, I opened my art page. It had been months since I posted anything. Without thinking too much, I uploaded a new image, a painting I'd finished 2 nights ago. A long dining table bathed in gold light. 3 figures seated close together, faces blurred, indistinguishable. And 1 empty chair placed at the far end. The shadows from the candles stretched toward it, as if the light itself wanted to fill that space. I didn't add a caption. I didn't need to. Within hours, the painting spread quietly. People commented not about my family, but about themselves. This reminds me of when they stopped calling. For anyone who's ever been left out of the picture, this hurts in the right way. I read every comment. Each one was like a small echo in the dark, proof that invisibility could be shared, and in that sharing softened. The next morning, the sea was calm again, pale blue under a washed sky. I almost felt peace until my phone rang. Dad? I hadn't heard his voice in nearly a year. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me, curiosity, closure, maybe both, made me answer. Hannah, he said, his tone clipped but uneasy. Your mother is upset. She usually is, I said. People are asking questions. About the article. About why you weren't there. I didn't write the article. No, but you posted that painting. Ah, so they'd seen it. He continued, Your mother says it makes us look like villains. She hasn't slept. She didn't lose sleep when she left me out of her wedding photos, I said quietly. Hannah, no, I interrupted. You don't get to call and manage me like a PR problem. He exhaled sharply, the sound of old frustration. You've always been so literal. This family doesn't need more tension. I closed my eyes. Then stopped pulling the string. For a moment I could hear the faint sound of my mother's voice in the background, muffled, anxious. My father's tone dropped to a whisper. She thinks you're trying to punish her. I laughed softly. Punish her? I left her alone with her perfection. That's the only punishment she'll ever understand. He didn't respond. There was just breathing, a quiet I'd once mistaken for love. Finally he said, You've changed. No, I said, my voice steady now. I just stopped apologizing. And I hung up. Afterward, I sat on the porch again, the phone cooling in my hand. The waves crashed below, unbothered. Daniel was outside fixing the last of the porch steps. He looked up when he saw me, concern in his eyes. You okay? He asked. Yeah, I said, just dealing with ghosts again. He nodded like he understood more than I said. Don't let them take the view from you, he said. I won't. That night I didn't sleep. I painted instead. The brush moved almost on its own, dark blues, white streaks for waves, a horizon where the sea met sky. In the center I added a small figure standing still while the world churned around her. When I finished, I looked at it and whispered I survived them. Outside the tide was rising, the moon bright over the water. I opened the window and let the sound in. I didn't post this painting. It was mine alone. By morning, the article had faded from the newsfeed, replaced by newer stories, fresher tragedies. My family's spotlight dimmed as quickly as it had flared. But the quiet that followed wasn't the same as before. It was stronger, deliberate. Before I stepped outside that day, I checked my phone one last time. No new messages, no new calls. I turned it off, slid it into the drawer, and left it there. On the porch, Daniel was sanding a plank of wood. He glanced up. Ready to help, I smiled. Always. The sun rose higher, scattering gold across the water. For once, I didn't look back at anything, only forward where the light met the horizon, and peace felt like something I could finally build with my own hands. Some calls sound like alarms. This one felt like a ghost refusing to rest. It came just after dusk, the cabin filled with the soft hum of ocean wind in candlelight. I'd been painting something abstract, all shades of blue, when the phone buzzed across the table. The screen flashed a single word that still had the power to hollow me out. Mom. For a long moment I just stared at it. The rain tapped faintly on the window as if waiting with me. I could have ignored it. I'd done it before, but something inside me, curiosity, fatigue, maybe compassion, made me swipe the screen. Hello, I said. The line was quiet for a few seconds, just the sound of shallow breathing. Then her voice broke through, brittle and unsteady. Hannah, please don't hang up. I closed my eyes. I'm listening. I don't understand why you're doing this, she began, her tone wavering between guilt and accusation. You've made everything so public. People are talking. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the flickering candle. You mean the article, the painting? I didn't make it public. You did. That's not fair, she said quickly. You've always been dramatic, but this is cruel. We never said anything bad about you. You didn't have to, I said softly. You just erased me. A pause. Then, more quietly, you're wrong. I was protecting you. You never understood how harsh people can be. I understood, I said. I just stopped caring what they thought. Her voice trembled. Your father's worried sick. He says you hate us. I don't hate you, I said. I just don't need your version of love anymore. That silenced her. I could hear a faint hum on the line. Maybe the television in the background, maybe the sound of her own breathing catching. When she spoke again, it was softer. Do you really think I meant to hurt you? I didn't answer right away. The truth was too complicated to fit into a sentence. No, I said finally. I think you meant to control me. You always thought control was love. Her voice cracked. I just wanted what was best for you. No, you wanted what looked best. I could picture her sitting in the living room, framed by polished furniture and perfect lighting, probably holding the same glass of white wine she used to sip during her quiet evenings. Even her guilt had style. Can't we start over? She asked suddenly. Come home, Hannah. Let's fix this before it's too late. My heart clenched, but my voice stayed even. You can start over, Mom. I already have. There was a long silence. Then I heard the sound of her crying. It wasn't loud or theatrical like I'd imagined it would be. It was small, real tired. For the first time, I heard my mother as a person, not a storm. You sound so far away, she whispered. I am, I said, and for once it's the right distance. When she spoke again, her voice was a whisper. I don't know how to reach you anymore. You don't have to, I said softly. That's the point. The line went quiet, then she said, almost pleading, Will you at least think about it? I looked out the window where the ocean shimmered faintly under the moonlight. Maybe someday, but not because you ask. Because I want to. Before she could respond, I ended the call. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full of everything I'd wanted to say for years and finally didn't have to. I sat there for a while, staring at the candle burning low, the wax spilling like time itself. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or grief, just release. When the phone buzzed again, I let it ring out. Later that night, I walked down to the water. The moon hung low, silver and whole. My footprints followed me down the sand, then vanished under the waves. I whispered into the wind, for years silence was your weapon. Tonight, it's my boundary. I stayed until the tide soaked the hem of my jeans, until the salt air filled my lungs. Then, I turned back toward the cabin. 2 days later, the letter arrived. It was Aunt Lillian who brought it in from the mailbox, her brows knit with something between concern and curiosity. It's from your mother, she said quietly. The envelope was cream-colored thick, the handwriting elegant and precise. My name written carefully, almost tenderly, as if the act itself might undo the distance between us. I sat at the kitchen table for a long moment before opening it. The paper was creased, smudged in places as if it had been rewritten, handled too many times. Hannah, it began. There are no excuses left, only truths I was too afraid to face. I spent most of my life terrified of losing the people I loved, so I tried to control everything. I thought if I kept things perfect, no one could leave me. But control is a strange thing. It looks like love until it suffocates it. I stopped reading for a moment. The words wavered in my vision, and I realized my hands were shaking. When people said I'd abandoned you, I told myself they were cruel. But now I see they weren't talking about the wedding. They were talking about every year I chose pride over tenderness, every call I didn't make, every silence I mistook for peace. I made you disappear so my world could stay neat. But it wasn't neat. It was empty. The ink bled faintly near the end, small circular stains that looked too round to be from water. If you choose not to come back, I'll understand. You don't owe me forgiveness or even acknowledgement. I just want you to know I see you now. I always should have. No signature, no love, Mom. Just that abrupt end, like she'd run out of both words and courage. I read it twice, then a third time. The tears came quietly, not because I wanted her back, but because she'd finally looked for me and found no one waiting. Lillian was standing by the counter watching me carefully. Do you want to talk about it? She asked. I folded the letter and shook my head. No, I think I just want to feel it. I carried the letter to my room and placed it in the wooden box that held Grandma Eleanor's words, the photo from her garden, and the silver ring my mother had once given me. The pieces of my life, all of them connected and broken in their own ways. That evening I lit a candle on the windowsill. The flame flickered uncertainly at first, then steadied its light dancing against the glass. I took out a clean sheet of paper and wrote only one line: "Forgiveness isn't for her to know, it's for me to feel." The air smelled faintly of wax and salt. I breathed it in, let it settle inside me. When the knock came at the door, it was Daniel. He stood in the doorway, his hair tousled by the wind, holding 2 mugs of tea. "You've been quiet," he said. "Everything okay?" "She wrote to me," I said. He nodded slowly, waiting. "What did she say? That she's sorry?" "Are you going to write back?" I looked at the candlelight flickering across the table. "No," I said. "Forgiveness doesn't need an audience." He studied me for a moment, then smiled softly. "That's fair." We sat in silence for a while, drinking tea, listening to the wind move through the trees. The ocean outside hummed like a heartbeat. When he left, I stayed at the table, staring at the candle's flame until it blurred. The light reflected in the window, merging with the faint silver of the sea beyond. The letter lay beside me, its edges curling slightly from the damp air. I reached out, touched it once, then blew out the candle. The darkness that filled the room wasn't empty, it was peaceful. For the first time I realized that forgiveness didn't mean going back. It meant letting the past stop living inside you. And in that quiet, I finally began to live for myself. The morning light poured through the tall windows of Haven Studio, soft and gold, painting everything in calm. It had been 1 year since I left the coast, behind 1 year since I stopped waiting for apologies that never came. New York moved fast outside, but inside the studio time felt deliberate, gentle. I arrived early, as I always did. The air still smelled faintly of paint and fresh coffee. Lydia had been up late hanging the final pieces for my first solo exhibition, The Empty Seat. The name came to me one night when I realized that absence could speak louder than presence. Every painting told a story not of revenge or loss, but of what remains after both. The walls glowed with quiet color shades of blue, gold, and ivory. In one corner, a canvas showed a figure walking into the horizon. Another smaller piece captured the soft blur of a table set for 4, one chair left unfinished. That one still made my chest tighten when I looked at it. Lydia arrived minutes later, balancing 2 cups of coffee and a stack of papers. "You're here early," she said, setting 1 cup in front of me. "You too," she smiled, brushing hair from her face. "You realize today's the big day, right? People are going to see everything you've held inside." I took a sip, the warmth grounding me. "Good, I'm done," hiding behind silence. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "It suits you. The piece, I mean." Before I could reply, the studio door opened and Aunt Lillian stepped in. She looked smaller than I remembered, but her eyes still carried that quiet strength that had saved me more times than I could count. She held a small box wrapped in a silk scarf. "I brought something for you," she said. Inside the box was a worn paintbrush, the wood smooth from years of use, and a faded photograph of me at 10 years old standing in Grandma Eleanor's garden, covered in paint and smiling like the world couldn't touch me. "She would have been proud of you," Lillian said softly. "You found your way back to color." I swallowed the lump in my throat. She's the one who taught me how. I placed the paintbrush beside the painting nearest the window, a piece titled Silence Speaks. It felt right, like one legacy ending and another beginning. As noon approached, the gallery filled with quiet chatter, the kind of hum that meant people were seeing themselves in your work. Lydia gave a short introduction, her voice steady and warm. "This collection," she said, "is about transformation. About how sometimes the hardest goodbyes are the ones we never say out loud." The guests wandered from canvas to canvas, pausing, whispering, leaving notes in the comment book at the door. I stood near the back, hands clasped loosely, just watching. For the first time, I didn't feel exposed. I felt understood. Then I saw her. She stood near the entrance, dressed simply, her hair streaked with more gray than I remembered. My mother. She didn't move at first. Neither did I. The noise around us faded like the world had lowered its volume just for this moment. Her eyes found mine, no sharpness this time, no pretense. Only exhaustion and something fragile, almost human. After what felt like an hour but was probably seconds, she walked toward me. In her hand was a small envelope. She stopped a few feet away, her voice barely above a whisper. "You did this?" "Yes," I said quietly. Her lips trembled. "It's beautiful." I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded. She looked down at the envelope. "I wrote you again," she said. "But you don't have to read it. I just wanted to deliver it myself." I took the envelope carefully, feeling its lightness, its weight. "Thank you," I said. She gave a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You were always the brave one," she murmured. And for the first time in my life, it didn't sound like an accusation. Then she turned and walked away. No dramatic pause, no tears, just quiet footsteps retreating into the sound of conversation. I watched her leave without following. It didn't feel like loss this time. It felt like closure. When the last guest left, and the city outside began to hum with evening, Lydia came to stand beside me. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Better than okay." "You didn't open it?" she asked, gesturing to the envelope in my hand. "No," I said. "Not everything needs to be read to be understood." We cleaned up slowly, the sun fading into amber. Aunt Lillian hugged me before she left, whispering, "You've done it, Hannah. You've changed the story." After she was gone, the studio grew quiet again. I sat at my desk, opened the small wooden box I kept tucked on the shelf, and placed the new letter beside the others. My grandmother's note, my mother's first apology, a photograph, a ring. I tied them together with a piece of ribbon and labeled the box "Past." When I closed the lid, it felt final, not like burying something but like finishing a painting you've stared at too long. I turned toward the window. Outside, the city pulsed with light, taxis gliding through rain-glossed streets, people rushing home, 1,000 small lives unfolding all at once. For years I'd wanted to disappear. Now I'd learned how to exist quietly, fully on my own terms. Daniel appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a rag, his shirt rolled up, sawdust on his arm. "Thought you might want some tea," he said, holding out a cup. I smiled. "You always show up at the right time." He grinned. "Occupational hazard." I nodded toward the canvas in the corner, a blank one waiting under the light. "I think it's time to start the next one." "What's it called?" he asked. "I don't know yet," I said. "Maybe continuing." He leaned against the table, watching as I picked up a clean brush. "You're not painting to escape anymore," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "I'm painting to stay." The first stroke of color spread across the white, soft and steady. Gold. We stood there for a long moment, the hum of the city below, mixing with the rhythm of my brush. The world outside kept moving, but inside that small studio it felt like everything had finally come still. I thought of all the things I'd lost: family, inheritance, the illusion of belonging, and realized I hadn't been left behind. I'd been set free. As the night deepened, Lydia called from the doorway, her voice teasing. "Hey, Miss Art Director, you realize you're supposed to be celebrating, not repainting your life again." I laughed softly. "This is the celebration." She shook her head, smiling. "Then promise me one thing, don't forget to sign this one." "I won't," I said. "This time the name belongs." The sound of laughter filled the studio, light and genuine. For once it didn't echo off walls, it stayed in the air, alive. Later, when everyone had gone, I stood alone, gazing at the nearly finished canvas. The golden streak caught the light from the street, glowing faintly like a horizon. I whispered. They left me out, but I found my way in. I set the brush down, exhaled, and smiled. If you've ever chosen peace over approval, if you've ever had to rebuild yourself after being forgotten, I hope you remember this. Sometimes leaving isn't revenge, it's recovery. Sometimes silence isn't punishment, It's freedom. And if you've ever felt invisible, don't fade away. Tell me your story in the comments. I want to know how you found your light again. Stay with us for more stories like this, stories about healing justice and finding your voice after the silence. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear that peace is possible. And tonight, it finally is.